we spent a day and a half in Prague, and then early the next morning we got on a bus and we drove for 7 or 8 hours to Poland. Poland, where World Youth Day was being held. We did a bunch of stuff in Poland, obviously, because we were there for a week, but I'll talk first about the World Youth Day activities and then kind of get into some other stuff we did on the side. So the World Youth Day opened on Tuesday night, July 26th. We went to the opening mass that night. We had a seat way in the back, which was kind of a problem because we were 200,000 other people. 200,000 may sound like a low number to you, but I think that was because the Kraków airport was kind of delayed and not everybody was able to get through. But 200,000 is still a lot. And we were able to see everybody, which was an advantage for being at the back, but it was still like the cardinal's like this tall. Anyway, the cardinal, it was the cardinal. The Pope hadn't arrived yet. He was scheduled to arrive the next day. The cardinal was Cardinal Stefan Dziwisz, who is a very close second alternative to Pope Francis, because Cardinal Dziwisz was Pope John Paul II's personal secretary. They described his relationship to Pope John Paul II as that of son and father. And he said the Mass and he gave the homily. There were, I think, a total of 5 words said in English the whole time. It was, "Dear friends, welcome to Kraków." And that's what he said. I think that was all I said in English. The rest of it was in Latin. The Mass was in Latin and the homily was in Polish. That was one of the coolest parts of World Youth Day for me, was walking home from the opening Mass. After Mass, it was like 7 or 8 p.m., and we had to get dinner before we head back to the hotel. And so we waited in line for about 45 minutes to get a hot dog. But it wasn't just any hot dog. This was a massive hot dog. It was advertised as an extra, extra, extra large hot dog, 3 X's and an L. And it was about 1 foot long and twice as thick as a regular hot dog, at least regular as an American hot dog. But that was a really good hot dog. But that wasn't what made that night so memorable. What made the night so memorable was this hot dog stand was right off the main road where everybody was going home. All 200,000 young people from all over the world. And so if you picture the scene, there are 200,000 people in this street. They're filling up the street. It's just a huge Catholic mob. This is if you've been to a Lifeline, this was 200 times the size of a Lifeline and 200 times the energy of a Lifeline. The energy was infectious. It was you could feel it. You could feel it in the air. It was the joy, simply put, it was the joy of 200,000 young people united in Jesus Christ. And that was so cool to be a part of. The next day, we saw the Pope. We were touring Krakow, and our guide looked at his phone and realized his tour guide buddies were sending him notes that the Pope was scheduled to come by to pass by in the Pope Mobile on a street that we were right next to, and he was about 1/3 of a mile away. And so, as soon as we heard this, we all all 80 of us piled up against this fence. There wasn't a huge crowd, and we saw the Pope. So after we saw the Pope, we went to another church, which I'll mention in more detail about later. And we went back home, and we saw the Pope again. So we had a free time after we visited that church. We just had to be back in the hotel by a specific time, and it was a lot of time. So we decided, let's hang out and watch for the Pope. So we hung out by the fence. It was just me and my small group, so it was 4 of us. We hung out on the fence for 45 minutes because we figured the Pope was going to show up. He never did. So we walked home, and then the Pope showed up. The Pope was on his way from Wawel Cathedral. He was on his way to Wawel Cathedral when we saw him the first time, and he had just finished his meeting with the dignitaries and was coming back to his papal apartment where he would be giving a speech. And so we saw the Pope coming just out of Babel Cathedral, I think. We saw him about a couple hundred yards away this time. But it was unmistakable. I mean, you saw the bright white Pope mobile, the bright white cassock, and the screaming crowd. So anyway, so we saw the Pope twice in one day, and that was a huge blessing. So that night, the Pope gave a speech at his papal apartment, like I mentioned. We didn't know what he was going to say. We were back in our room that night, and our hotel was right across the street from a youth festival, which was like a smaller area where they would frequently have, there was like a stage set up, and they would frequently have like a band playing or whatnot, and there was a food stand right nearby, so that was often where we went to get food. But anyway, so there was this youth festival across the street, and they were loud that night, and we were kind of like, I wish they would quiet down so we could go to sleep, but of course it was good. And I found out later that night when the Pope gave a speech, he said, at the end, he said, "Now you young people must do your duty, which is to make noise all night." And I said, and that is a paraphrase, wasn't exactly right. So if I had known that, I would probably have commended them. But so for the next couple of days, it was Wednesday, Thursday, Friday, the 2 days after the days after the opening mass. We went to catechetical sessions with English-speaking pilgrims, which was very nice. The Knights of Columbus had rented out a sports arena in Krakow. I think it held about 17,000, and I don't remember what sport it was, but and there they had English-speaking catechetical sessions, and thousands of people that spoke English from all over the world came. There were people from Ireland, Scotland, Britain, and Australia, in addition to America. So we went there for the catechetical sessions, and those were fantastic. They had 3 speakers every day plus mass. One of the speakers every day was a cardinal. So we heard 3 cardinals speak. There were 2 nuns that spoke at one point. They had a married couple every day speak about that kind of vocation. It was really cool. It was really cool. So also at the Toron Arena, which is what this event was called, at the Toron Arena in the basement, they had an adoration chapel, and they had relics up on display for veneration in the chapel. And we went down, and I venerated some relics. And I venerated 5 relics. 2 of them, I'm not sure how to pronounce their last names, so I'm sorry. But they were also I looked them up. They're like heroic Polish 20th century saints. They haven't been canonized yet, but I think one is a venerable and one is a blessed. But aside from them, I got to kiss the relics of St. John Paul II, St. Maximilian Kolbe, and St. Faustina. And that was an incredible experience. So that was another amazing thing I got to do at the Toronto Arena. That was what we did in the mornings of Wednesday, Thursday, Friday, and we usually took the afternoons for side touring of Krakow, or pilgrimaging to churches and that kind of thing. But I'll skip over that for the time being. I'll come back to it later. The Stations of the Cross. On Friday night, there was a large group that's kind of an understatement. But when I say a large group, I mean all the pilgrims that had come in for Krakow for the occasion were invited to come, and by this point it was 800,000 people on Friday, all coming together to pray the Stations of the Cross with Pope Francis. And that Stations of the Cross was really a cool experience for me. Before I had always prayed the Stations of the Cross, think about how it related to me. Like, Jesus suffered and died for my sins, and he set me free and that kind of thing. But this gave me a kind of new perspective, and it likened all 14 stations to the 14 works of mercy. This is the year of mercy. The theme of World Youth Day was Blessed are the Merciful, that beatitude. And so naturally the Stations of the Cross were focused on showing mercy to our neighbor. And that was a really cool experience for me. I hadn't really thought about how the Stations of the Cross related to me going out. And Pope Francis gave a cool speech about that after the stations were over. And one of the things I specifically remember him saying, because it made an impact on me, he said, "Our credibility as Christians is proven by the works of mercy." And I thought that was really cool. So that was one of and Friday morning, the catechetical session was led by, the first speaker was a nun from the Sisters of Our Lady of Mercy in Krakow. The Sisters of Our Lady of Mercy was the order that St. Faustina Kowalska belonged to. And this nun gave an incredible speech about, incredible talk about showing mercy. And so that was in the morning, and it was capped off by the Stations of the Cross in the afternoon. And so Friday was really a motivation for me to kind of get out of my comfort zone and start being more merciful to just the people on my right and my left. And so I'm walking in the group trying to talk to the people next to me. If you're watching this, you're in my group, and you felt like I didn't show mercy to you, I apologize. But I'm working on it. Stations of the Cross. Stations of the Cross was on Friday. On Saturday, Saturday was interesting. Okay, Saturday I'll start from the beginning. We got up at 8, which was a huge blessing because we're getting up at like 6 o'clock most days to get there at a good time for the catechetical sessions. So we got up at 8 o'clock, and then we had Mass at the most boring church I have ever been to in the world. You don't be outraged because I'm talking about the first floor conference room of our hotel. There's barely enough room to get all 85 of us in that room, but we said Mass there, which really I think was cool because it showed how dedicated the bishops and the leaders were of getting Mass in every day. So we left the hotel Mass at about 10:30 or so, and then we arrived at about 4:30. So we had traveled for about 6 hours to get to the Campus Misericordiae. We got there, and the first thing I did was lie down and take a nap. Took a nap for like an hour and a half, and then we just kind of hung out until the evening program started at 7:30. The evening program for the vigil. The overnight vigil, about 1.5 to 2 million were their estimates of people in the vigil that night. The reason why it's such a big jump from Friday, Friday was 800,000, it was almost 1 million more people that had come in about a day, because apparently the way it works is when World Youth Day is held in Europe, everybody over the weekend, if people are at school or working or something, will come in on Friday night for the Saturday events. So that's why it was such an influx of people from Friday to Saturday. Anyway, so the vigil started about 7:30. It was the program. Part of the program was 3 very moving testimonies by 3 young adults. One of them was from Iraq, and she spoke in English about how the Middle East, and she ended by asking for prayers for Syria, which is her beloved country. And so Pope Francis started out his speech right afterwards by pointing right back to that and saying, and we started by praying for Syria. There was a moment of silence, and that was really cool. And that was the first of a really cool. That was the first part of an incredible speech. That was probably the best one I've ever heard in my life. And I'm going to link to it in the description of this video. And so when you get done, read it. And pray about it, because it was incredible. It was powerful to be a part of. And another thing he said in that speech was, going off the theme of, we're not called to build up walls, we're called to build bridges. And he said the simplest bridge you can build is by taking one another's hand. And so he said, go on, do it right now. And so everybody started shaking people's hands or taking them. And it was and that was another really cool, it helped me to think a lot differently about mercy and about God's call to me as I was growing up to have an impact, to make a mark. And that was another theme he made, but I'm not going to spoil it all. You should read it for yourself. So we had that, and then we had a brief adoration period. Adoration with 2 million people was pretty insane. Now, unfortunately, before we found out that our spot was actually behind the stage. So we saw none of this with our own eyes, although if we had it, the Pope would have been impossible to see anyway because we were so far away. We actually had relatively good seats, except that they were behind the stage. So we sat behind the stage. We watched everything on a big screen that was set up, and we heard everything through speakers and over the radio where English translations were being broadcasted. We had adoration with 2 million people. And then I think the Pope left, and we were And then we were about to go to bed, but then they started playing music, and it was intended to be like a prayer or worship session. But I was tired, and so I didn't really pray. I tried to go to sleep, but they didn't stop until like 12:30. I got to bed about 12:30, and I woke up about 5:30 with the sun, because that's what pretty much everybody did. Pretty much everybody got up with the sun, which is interesting because they didn't probably figure that everyone was going to be up at 5:30. So like, why not have the mass, like the closing mass at like 6 or 7:30? But they had the mass at 10:30. So we woke up and we had plenty of time. We had a lot of time to eat breakfast, drink water. I drank a ton of water. Eat breakfast, drink water, pack up. I had a huge bag with me. I packed way more than I should have, including a sleeping bag. But anyways, roll up the sleeping bag. That was another thing I did. And then the closing mass was at 10:30, and the Pope gave another great homily to follow up the speech from last night. And the gospel we heard was the story of Zacchaeus. I think it was a different story back home, but they had a special mass because it was the World Youth Day closing mass. Another thing was also the closing mass was open to the public. Even if you weren't registered to be a pilgrim, you were welcome to come to the closing mass. And that bumped up the final tally of pilgrims to 3 million. I did the research. Our group of 85 was less than a hundredth of a percent of the total amount of people at World Youth Day for the closing mass. And the closing mass was great. The only thing that kind of put a downer on it was that some people, not me, were not drinking enough water. And it was hot. Like I said, it was 90 degrees out, and we were standing outside. We had no chairs. Very few people had chairs. And people were starting to pass out because they were getting dehydrated. And that was why we had to stay a little bit after the mass, was because some people had actually gotten taken to the hospital after, or they had been driven away in an ambulance, and we didn't know what was going to happen to them. So obviously we weren't going to walk away. So we waited for like an hour in the hot sun. We had no one to trade with anymore. We had no pilgrims to trade with. So we waited for like an hour. We waited like an hour for the people, and then they worked out a plan that, I'm not sure exactly what the plan was. But they worked out a plan. We were finally going to go home, and then it started raining. And it started raining hard. It started raining really hard. And it was like this was like a lightning cloud. And we had lightning rods all around our sector. And so we kind of panicked, and we went to a couple of tents, volunteer tents, and we crammed in there. We were the only group left by this point. We crammed in there and we waited out the storm, and nobody got hurt, and it was fine. But then we walked home, and we got caught in an even bigger storm that lasted for at least a couple hours. We had to walk straight through it because we had to go home, and because it was lightning because there were lightning and thunder, there was no trams running. And so we left at like 1, and we got back at about 8, because we had to walk most of the way. We were getting rained down, and I was soaked, and I had no umbrella or whatever, nothing to protect me, and no poncho. I decided not to pack my poncho for some lame reason. We got back home, and we were soaked. We were exhausted. We were finally home. We walked for like 7 hours, mostly in the rain. But we ate dinner that night. We packed up. And that was pretty much the end of our stay in Krakow.